I thought I was finally getting my dream house for half the market price, until I walked in to find my sister's entire family had already moved in, and my parents were standing there with the spare keys they'd given them. Hi everyone, I'm Celeste, and this story happened to me just 6 months ago. I'm 28. I work in marketing coordination for a tech startup in Denver, and up until this disaster, I thought I had my life pretty well figured out. I'd been living in this shoebox studio apartment for 3 years, saving every penny I could because I was absolutely determined to buy my own place before I turned 30. Let me introduce you to the cast of characters who turned my home-buying dream into a complete nightmare. First, there's my older sister Fiona. She's 32, married to Nash, who's 34, and they have 7-year-old twin daughters named Becca and Blair. Fiona has always been what you'd call the golden child in our family. She got married young, had the twins, and somehow everything just seems to work out for her. She's the type of person who calls our mom 3 times a day and still expects help with grocery money even though she and Nash both work. Nash is actually a decent guy most of the time. He works construction and he's really good with his hands, but the past couple years have been rough for him. Work has been inconsistent, and I know they've been struggling to make ends meet. The twins are at that age where they need everything: school supplies, clothes they'll outgrow in 6 months, soccer cleats. It adds up fast. Then there's my mother Vera. She's 58 and works as a real estate agent here in Denver, which becomes very important to this story. Mom has this way of managing everyone's lives whether they ask her to or not. She means well, I think, but she's always been the type to make decisions first and explain them later. She definitely favors Fiona, though she'd never admit it. It's always been that way since we were kids. My dad Garrett is 60 and just retired from being a mechanic. He's one of those guys who keeps the peace by going along with whatever mom decides. He's not confrontational at all, which usually works fine until it really, really doesn't. Dad loves all of us, but he's never been great at standing up to Mom when she gets an idea in her head. Now here's the thing about my family dynamic that you need to understand. I've always been the independent one. When Fiona needed help with her wedding, I planned half of it. When Nash got laid off 2 years ago, I'm the one who helped them cover their rent for 3 months. When the twins needed school clothes and Fiona was stressed about money, I took them shopping. I don't say this to pat myself on the back. I say it because I genuinely love helping my family. But somewhere along the way, I think they started seeing me as the person who has everything handled, the one who doesn't need anything from anyone. That's probably why I didn't tell them I was house hunting. For months, I'd been scrolling through listings online, getting pre-approved for loans, learning about down payments and closing costs. I did all the research myself because I wanted to prove I could handle this huge life step completely on my own. I imagined the moment I'd surprise them with the news that I'd bought my first house. I pictured their faces, how proud they'd be, how impressed they'd be that quiet little Celeste had pulled off something this big without anyone's help. I had no idea that my mother had been planning something completely different behind my back. I had no idea that what I thought would be my greatest achievement was about to become the biggest family crisis we'd ever faced. Because when I walked into my new house with my brand new keys, I found my entire family already living there. Let me take you back to how this whole mess started, because honestly, it began as the best 2 weeks of my entire life. I'd been living in this tiny studio apartment on the east side of Denver for 3 years, and when I say tiny, I mean the kitchen was literally just a hot plate and a mini fridge tucked into what most people would call a closet. My bed folded into the wall, and I had to move my one chair to open the front door all the way. But the rent was only $800 a month, which meant I could save almost $2,000 every month toward buying a house. While all my college friends were posting Instagram photos of their cute apartments with actual separate bedrooms, I was eating ramen and packing lunches every single day, calculating mortgage payments on my phone. I had spreadsheets tracking every penny. I knew exactly how much I needed for a down payment, closing costs, moving expenses, and 6 months of emergency payments. I was obsessed with the idea of owning something that was completely mine. The thing is, Denver's housing market is absolutely insane. Houses that should cost $200,000 were selling for $400,000, and anything decent was getting snapped up by cash offers from investors. I'd been to probably 15 open houses over 6 months, and every single time, I'd fall in love with a place only to find out it sold for $50,000 over asking price to someone who didn't even need a loan. I was starting to think I'd never find anything when I saw the listing for 1247 Maple Grove Street. It was a 1950s bungalow with original hardwood floors, built-in bookshelves, and this amazing big front porch with white columns. The listing photos showed a house that needed some cosmetic updates but had incredible bones. The kitchen had vintage tile that most people would probably want to rip out, but I thought it was charming. There was a clawfoot tub in the bathroom and these huge windows that let in tons of natural light. But here's the thing that made me literally gasp when I saw the listing. It was priced at $285,000. In that neighborhood, houses were selling for at least $400,000. I immediately assumed there was something seriously wrong with it. Maybe the foundation was cracked, or there was mold, or the electrical system was from 1952 and ready to burn the place down. I called the listing agent that same day, and that's when I met Mrs. Cordelia Thorne. She was 78 years old and had lived in that house for 45 years. Her husband had died 2 years earlier, and she was moving to an assisted living facility to be closer to her son. But Mrs. Thorne didn't just want to sell to the highest bidder. She told me over the phone that she wanted to sell to someone who would love the house the way she had. When I went to see the house, Mrs. Thorne walked me through every room and told me stories about the life she'd built there. She showed me the kitchen where she'd taught her daughter to bake, the living room where her grandchildren had opened Christmas presents, the back garden where her husband had grown tomatoes every summer. She told me she'd raised 3 children in that house as a single mother after her first husband left when the kids were young. Then she looked at me and said something I'll never forget. "You remind me of myself when I first bought this house. I was 28, just like you, and everyone thought I was crazy for buying a place by myself. But I knew I could make it into something special." Mrs. Thorne told me she'd had 12 other people look at the house, including several investors who offered cash. But she wanted to sell it to someone who saw it as a home, not an investment. She said if I could get pre-approved and handle a normal sale timeline, the house was mine. I spent the next 2 weeks in a complete whirlwind, getting inspections, finalizing my loan, and preparing for the biggest purchase of my life. I closed on the house on a Friday morning at 10 a.m. I remember sitting in the title company office, signing what felt like 100 different documents, and getting those keys placed in my hand. Mrs. Thorne was there, and she squeezed my shoulder and said, "Congratulations, dear. Make beautiful memories there." I was practically floating as I walked out to my car. My plan was simple. I'd drive by the house, maybe take a few pictures to post on social media later, then go home and pack for the big move over the weekend. I was going to surprise my family with the news at Sunday dinner. I'd already rehearsed how I'd casually mention that I had some exciting news to share. But first, I just wanted to stand in my house for a few minutes and let it sink in that it was actually mine. I pulled into the driveway around 2 p.m. and immediately something felt wrong. There was a bright pink bicycle lying on its side near the front steps. A soccer ball was sitting in the flower bed. I could hear voices coming from inside the house, kids laughing, adults talking loudly. My first thought was that maybe Mrs. Thorne had family over to help her get the last of her things. But Mrs. Thorne had told me she'd already moved everything out earlier that week. I sat in my car for a minute, completely confused, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I walked up to the front door and put my brand new key in the lock. The door opened, and I stepped into what should have been my empty house. Instead, I walked into complete chaos. Nash was in the living room, wearing old clothes covered in paint, rolling white primer over the walls. The twins, Becca and Blair, came running down the hallway, shouting something about who got the bigger bedroom. They stopped dead when they saw me, looking just as confused as I felt. "Aunt Celeste," Becca said. "What are you doing here? Are you here to help us paint?" I walked toward the kitchen in a daze, and that's when I saw Fiona. She was unpacking dishes from a cardboard box, arranging them in the cabinets like she owned the place. My mom was there too, wiping down the counters, and my dad was in the corner assembling what looked like a kitchen table. The whole scene was so surreal that for a second I wondered if I was having some kind of breakdown. Maybe I'd imagined buying the house. Maybe I'd dreamed the whole thing. "Celeste." Fiona looked up from the box of dishes, more surprised than guilty. "What are you doing here? Mom said you were house-sitting for someone this weekend." "House-sitting?" I managed to get the word out, but my voice sounded strange, like it was coming from someone else. "I'm not house-sitting. I bought this house. I literally closed on it this morning." The kitchen went completely silent. Nash stopped hammering whatever he was working on in the living room. Even the twins stopped running around. My mother stood up slowly, still holding the dish towel, and looked at me like I'd just told her I was from Mars. "Honey, that's not possible," she said in that patient tone she uses when she thinks someone is being ridiculous. "Your father and I helped Fiona with the down payment on this house 3 weeks ago. We've been planning the move for over a month." I reached into my purse and pulled out the folder of closing documents, my hands shaking. "Mom, my name is on the deed. I have the title paperwork right here. I just spent the last 3 hours signing mortgage documents." Fiona set down the plate she was holding and walked over to me. For the first time, she looked genuinely concerned instead of just confused. "Celeste, I think there's been some kind of mistake. Mom has been showing me this house for weeks. She said the previous owner specifically wanted to sell to a family with children." That's when the horrible truth started to become clear. The next 20 minutes were absolute chaos. Everyone was talking at once, voices getting louder, and I felt like I was watching my family implode in real time. My dad kept saying, "Now let's all just calm down and figure this out," while Nash stood there looking mortified, paint rollers still dripping in his hand. The twins had retreated to the hallway, sensing the adult tension, but not understanding why everyone was suddenly yelling. But the worst part was watching my mother try to manage the situation like she always does, except this time her managing had created a disaster that couldn't be fixed with her usual tactics. "Vera, what exactly did you tell Fiona?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I told her the truth," Mom said defensively, "that there was a lovely house that would be perfect for their family, and that I could help them get it. But you knew I was the buyer. You've been my agent for the past month. You helped me submit my offer." "Well, yes. But honey, you were just looking around. I didn't think you were serious about actually buying anything this quickly." That's when it hit me, the full scope of what had happened. My mother had been playing both sides, telling me that Fiona was just dreaming about buying a house while simultaneously telling Fiona that my legitimate purchase was somehow just me looking around. Fiona was starting to cry, which made everything 10 times worse because Fiona never cries. "I don't understand what's happening." "Mom, you said everything was handled. You said the paperwork was done." "It is done," I said, and my voice came out harder than I intended. "The paperwork is done. My name is on the deed. This is my house." Nash finally spoke up. "Celeste, we've put $3,000 into paint and supplies. We took time off work to move. The girls have been talking about their new bedrooms for weeks. And I've been saving money for 3 years. I've been pre-approved for a mortgage for 6 months. I've had inspections done. I've planned my entire life around this. The conversation kept going in circles, everyone trying to find some solution that would magically make this work for everyone. But I realized something standing in that kitchen, surrounded by my family's stuff in my house. There was no compromise here. This wasn't a miscommunication that could be smoothed over with a family meeting. Everyone needs to leave, I said quietly. Celeste, don't be dramatic, my mother started, but I cut her off. I'm not being dramatic. I'm being clear. You have 48 hours to get your things out of my house. Celeste! Fiona's voice was shocked. This is your family. We can figure something out. No, we can't. There's nothing to figure out. I bought this house. I have a mortgage payment due in 30 days. I've already given notice on my apartment. This isn't a negotiation. I turned to look directly at my dad, who'd been staying quiet through the whole confrontation. Dad, I need you to hear me. This is not a family discussion. This is not something Mom gets to manage or fix. I bought this house legally, and everyone else needs to leave. Nash set down his paint roller and looked genuinely ashamed. Celeste, I'm sorry. Your mom said everything was handled properly. I wouldn't have started work on the place if I'd known there was any question about ownership. I know you wouldn't have, Nash. This isn't your fault. But I could see in my mother's face that she still thought this was all going to blow over, that somehow she'd find a way to make everyone happy like she always did. That night, I went back to my tiny studio apartment and made a list of everything I needed to do. I called a locksmith for the next morning. I called Mrs. Thorne to explain what had happened, and I mentally prepared myself for the reality that my family was going to make this as difficult as possible. Because I knew my mother well enough to know she wasn't going to give up without a fight. Saturday evening, I drove back to the house with my heart pounding. I'd spent the entire day getting the locks changed and mentally preparing myself for what I might find. I was hoping against hope that my family had respected my 48-hour deadline and cleared out their belongings. Instead, I pulled into the driveway to see even more of their stuff scattered across the front yard. Nash had apparently decided to power wash the front porch, and there were drop cloths everywhere. Through the front windows, I could see the twins watching television in what was supposed to be my living room. I used my new key and walked in to find the situation had somehow gotten worse. Fiona was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open, looking at what appeared to be school enrollment websites. She looked up when I came in, and her eyes were red from crying. Celeste, please, just hear me out. The girls are supposed to start at Roosevelt Elementary on Monday. I've already enrolled them. We can't just uproot them again. You enrolled them using this address? Fiona, you don't live here. But we were going to. Mom promised us we could work this out as a family. That's when Nash came in from the backyard, looking absolutely exhausted. Celeste, I know this is messed up, but can we please just talk about this rationally? Maybe we could work out some kind of arrangement where we help with the mortgage payments? I was about to explain for the 100th time that there was no arrangement to be made when I heard cars pulling into the driveway. Through the front window, I saw my parents getting out of their car, followed by another car I didn't recognize. My mother walked in first, looking determined and slightly frantic. Celeste, before you say anything, I want you to meet someone. This is Mrs. Patterson from the real estate board. I've asked her to help us sort this situation out properly. Behind her walked an elderly woman who looked very familiar, followed by a man in his 50s wearing a police uniform. It took me a second to realize why Mrs. Patterson looked familiar. It was Mrs. Thorne, and the man with her had to be her son. Actually, Mrs. Thorne said, her voice crisp with anger, I'm Mrs. Thorne, and this is my son Raymond, who happens to be a detective with the Denver Police Department. And I'm here because someone called my son this morning claiming that someone was illegally occupying my former house. The room went dead silent. My mother's face went completely white. Detective Thorne stepped forward, pulling out a small notebook. Mrs. Morrison, You called our non-emergency line this morning to report that your daughter was illegally occupying a house that belonged to your other daughter. Is that correct? I was just trying to get help with a family dispute, my mother said, her voice getting smaller. Ma'am, filing a false police report is a crime, but more importantly, we've discovered some irregularities in your professional conduct that we need to discuss. Mrs. Thorne stepped forward, and I could see she was absolutely furious. Celeste, this woman called my son claiming you were trespassing in your own house. When Raymond called me to verify the situation, I discovered that she had attempted to submit a second offer on behalf of another buyer after your offer had already been accepted. That's fraud. More than that, Detective Thorne continued, looking directly at my mother. It's a violation of your real estate license that could result in suspension and criminal charges. Fiona stood up from the kitchen table, looking horrified. Mom, what did you do? For the first time since this whole nightmare started, my mother looked genuinely scared. I was just trying to help both of my daughters. I thought if I could get Celeste to understand how much Fiona needed this house, maybe we could all work together. By lying to everyone involved and potentially committing fraud? Mrs. Thorne's voice was ice cold. I specifically chose Celeste because she reminded me of myself, a young woman brave enough to make her own way in the world. I will not have my decision undermined by someone's manipulation. Nash was already moving toward the boxes in the kitchen. We're leaving right now. Fiona, get the girls' stuff together. But my mother still wasn't ready to give up. Celeste, you can't seriously want to destroy your family over a house. That's when I finally found my voice again. I'm not destroying anything, Mom. You did that when you decided to lie to everyone instead of just telling the truth. 6 months later, I'm sitting on the front porch of my house, watching the sunset paint the sky pink and orange, and I can honestly say this has been the most challenging and rewarding year of my life. The first few weeks after that terrible confrontation were brutal. My family didn't speak to me for almost a month. My mother was facing potential disciplinary action from the real estate board, and she blamed me for not just going along with her plan to make everyone happy. Fiona and Nash had to scramble to find temporary housing while they looked for something they could actually afford. But here's what I learned during those quiet weeks when my phone wasn't ringing with family drama. Silence isn't always a bad thing. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't managing anyone else's crisis or trying to fix problems I didn't create. I was just living in my beautiful house, painting the bedroom walls the exact shade of blue I'd been dreaming about, and learning what it felt like to have a space that was completely, undeniably mine. Mrs. Thorne became my unexpected ally during this whole mess. She started stopping by once a week, bringing me homemade cookies and stories about the neighborhood. She told me about Mrs. Chen next door, who grows the most amazing vegetables and always has extras to share. She introduced me to the Rodriguez family across the street, whose kids could help with yard work for a few extra dollars. But more than that, Mrs. Thorne helped me understand something crucial about standing up for yourself. She told me about buying the house in 1978 when her first husband left her with 3 kids under 10 years old. Everyone told her she was making a mistake, that she should move back in with her parents, that she couldn't handle home ownership alone. But she did it anyway, and she raised those kids in a house that was truly hers. The people who love you don't ask you to make yourself smaller to make them more comfortable, she told me one afternoon while we were planting tulip bulbs in the front garden. Slowly, my family started to come around. Nash was the first to apologize, really apologize. He came by one evening with a 6-pack of beer and said he'd known something felt wrong about the whole situation, but had trusted my mother's assurances. He helped me install new shelving in the garage, and we talked about how hard it had been for him to feel like he couldn't provide the kind of home Fiona wanted. Fiona took longer, but she eventually admitted that part of her had known Mom was manipulating the situation. She said she'd been so desperate for a solution to their housing problems that she'd let herself believe in a miracle that was too good to be true, They found a fixer-upper about 20 minutes away, a house that needed work but had great potential. Nash's construction skills turned it into something really special, and I could see how proud they both were of what they'd built together. My mother was the hardest to reconcile with. She had to take ethics classes to keep her real estate license, and she struggled with admitting that her helping had actually hurt everyone involved. It took months of difficult conversations, but eventually she acknowledged that she'd overstepped in a major way. The most beautiful part of this whole story is what happened with Mrs. Thorne. When she moved into assisted living last month, she gave me the original 1950s blueprints of the house and her grandmother's handwritten recipe collection. She said she was passing on the legacy of strong women who knew how to build homes on their own terms. Now, when I walk through my house every morning, I'm not just seeing rooms I own, I'm seeing the life I chose to build for myself, even when it meant disappointing people I love. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is show them who you really are, even if it's not who they expected you to be.